The crisp autumn wind carried the scent of chrysanthemums across Elmshore Cemetery, rustling through the ancient oak trees that stood sentinel over generations of departed souls. Thaddeus Westbrook pulled his cashmere coat tighter as he navigated. The winding path, a bouquet of white lilies clutched in his hand. Each step toward Sylvia's grave felt heavier than the last, the weight of 1 year's absence pressing down on his shoulders. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thad was a man accustomed to command. As founder and CEO of Westbrook Innovations, he transformed a garage startup into a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. His face graced magazine covers, his name peppered financial headlines. But here, among the weathered headstones and whispers of the departed, he was simply a man grieving the wife taken too soon by a relentless illness that even his billions couldn't cure. The marble headstone came into view, elegant yet understated, just as Sylvia would have wanted. He knelt, brushing away fallen leaves from the engraved surface, when something unusual caught his eye. 2 small figures moved between distant graves, their silhouettes partially obscured by morning mist. Children, it seemed, carrying baskets and stopping at various markers. Curiosity momentarily displacing his grief, Thad watched as the children, twins, he realized as they drew closer, methodically placed flowers at seemingly random graves. They worked in perfect synchronicity, one arranging blooms while the other consulted a tattered notebook. Their clothes were clean but visibly worn. Matching navy peacoats a size too large, hand-knitted scarves wrapped multiple times around their small necks. The boy noticed him first, nudging his sister and whispering something that made both children pause their ritual. They couldn't have been older than 8 or 9, with identical heart-shaped faces and striking azure eyes that seemed to assess Thad with unsettling maturity. "Would you like to buy some flowers for your loved one, sir?" the girl called out, her voice clear and confident despite her small stature. "We have marigolds and daisies today, $2 a bunch." Something about her directness, so incongruous, with her youth, pulled Thad from his reverie. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten them. Up close, the differences between the twins became apparent. The boy's hair fell in unruly copper waves, while his sister's was tamed into a practical braid of the same vibrant hue. He maintained a protective stance, slightly in front of her, though she seemed the more forthright of the pair. "Do you two always sell flowers here?" Thad asked, glancing at their nearly empty baskets. "Only on weekends and special days," the boy answered, his voice softer than his sister's, but no less assured. "We maintain the forgotten graves." "The forgotten?" "People without families to visit them anymore," the girl explained, gesturing toward a weathered marker they decorated with bright yellow marigolds. "Everyone deserves flowers sometimes." Thad felt something stir within him, something beyond the grief that had become his constant companion. These children, tending to strangers' graves with such earnest care, embodied a compassion often absent in his corporate world. "I'm Thad," he said, extending his hand without thinking. The twins exchanged a glance laden with unspoken communication, before the girl stepped forward, shaking his hand with surprising firmness. "I'm Lyra," she said. "This is my brother, Orion." The boy nodded but kept his distance, eyes wary beneath his fringe of copper hair. "We should go," he murmured to his sister. "Aunt Zora will worry." "Wait," Thad said, reaching for his wallet. "I'd like to buy all your remaining flowers, for the forgotten, as you say." Relief visibly washed over their features. Lyra quickly calculated the cost, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "That would be $26, sir." Thad extracted a $100 bill and handed it to her. "Keep the change for your next flower purchase." Lyra's eyes widened, but she accepted the money with dignity rather than excitement. "Thank you, sir. Would you like us to place them for you?" "Please." Thad nodded, strangely reluctant to see them leave. As the twins moved efficiently among the neglected graves, Thad noticed something that made his heart stutter. A distinctive glint on Lyra's right hand as she arranged the flowers. A ring, far too large for her small finger, secured around her thumb with what appeared to be colored string. Not just any ring, a delicate gold band inlaid with tiny sapphires forming a constellation pattern, Sylvia's ring. The custom piece he'd commissioned for their 10th anniversary, inspired by the night sky on the evening they'd met. The ring that had been buried with her. His breath caught painfully in his chest. Impossible. Yet there it was, wrapped around a child's thumb, the unique arrangement of stones, unmistakable even at a distance. "That ring," he managed, his voice barely audible over the whisper of wind through the cemetery oaks. "Where did you get it?" Lyra followed his gaze to her hand, her expression immediately guarded. She tucked her hand into her pocket with practiced swiftness. "It was our mother's," Orion answered, moving closer to his sister. "She's gone now." "Who was your mother?" Thad asked, struggling to keep his voice even as possibilities, each more improbable than the last, cascaded through his mind. "We need to go," Lyra declared, suddenly all business. "Thank you for buying our flowers." Before Thad could respond, the twins gathered their empty baskets and retreated down the winding cemetery path, their synchronized strides quickening until they disappeared behind a mausoleum. Thad stood frozen, the echo of their footsteps fading into the rustle of autumn leaves. After 15 years in the cutthroat technology sector, he'd developed an almost preternatural instinct for recognizing patterns, connecting disparate pieces of information into coherent wholes. Something significant had just presented itself, a mystery embodied in two children, with copper hair and his dead wife's ring. He pulled out his phone and dialed the one person who had never failed him. "Ansel, I need you at Elmshore Cemetery. Now, and bring the research team." 2 hours later, Thad paced the polished floors of his glass-walled office atop the Westbrook Innovations Tower in Beacon Harbor. The view of the ocean stretching to the horizon, a vista that had once filled him with satisfaction, now seemed irrelevant, a mere backdrop to the mystery that consumed his thoughts. "Tell me again," he demanded of Ansel Finch, his chief of operations and oldest friend. Ansel adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, consulting the tablet in his hand. "Twins, approximately 8 years old. Names Orion and Lyra, no surname obtained. Regularly visit Elmshore Cemetery on weekends to sell and place flowers. Local groundskeeper says they've been coming for about 6 months, always accompanied by a woman who waits at the cemetery entrance, presumably the Aunt Zora they mentioned." "And the ring?" Ansel's expression tightened. "Our team has confirmed, through security footage, that the girl was indeed wearing a ring matching the description of Mrs. Westbrook's constellation band. The one that was buried with her," Thad finished, the words bitter on his tongue, the implications churned in his stomach. Grave robbery? Some elaborate scam? Or something more complex entirely? "There's more," Ansel continued, swiping through his notes. "According to cemetery records, the children frequently visit plot number 247, registered to a Valencia Reyes, deceased approximately 7 months ago. Cause of death? Complications following cardiac arrest." Valencia Reyes. The name struck Thad like a physical blow, catapulting him back 15 years to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Before Westbrook Innovations became a household name. Before Sylvia. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before everything. "Valencia," he whispered, the name foreign yet achingly familiar on his lips. Ansel watched him carefully. You knew her. It wasn't a question. After 2 decades at Thad's side, from struggling entrepreneurs to corporate titans, Ansel could read him better than anyone alive. We need to find those children, Thad said instead of answering. And this Aunt Zora, today. Ansel nodded, already tapping instructions into his tablet. The team is working on it. Based on their cemetery visits and visual identification, we should have a location by evening. No! Thad's voice cracked with unexpected emotion. No teams, no corporate resources. This is personal, Ansel, just you and me. Surprise flickered across Ansel's typically impassive features. Thad, what exactly are we dealing with here? Thad moved to the wall-length window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass as memories he'd long suppressed rose to the surface. 15 years ago, before the company took off, I spent a summer in Baywick Village, working on the prototype for our first neural interface. I rented space in an old boathouse converted to artist studios. His reflection stared back at him, haunted. That's where I met Valencia. She was a sculptor, brilliant, unconventional, completely unlike anyone I'd ever known. You were involved, Ansel stated, connecting the dots. For 3 months, the most creatively alive I've ever been. Thad turned from the window. Then the Cambridge opportunity came, the grant that would fund everything. I left for Massachusetts, promised to return when I'd secured our future. He laughed bitterly. 2 weeks later, I met Sylvia at a venture capital event. She believed in my vision, introduced me to her father's investment circle. You know the rest. And Valencia, I sent her a letter, explained I wouldn't be coming back, that our paths were leading different directions. The admission felt hollow, cruel in its simplicity. She never responded. I convinced myself it had been a summer romance, nothing more. Ansel set his tablet down. These twins, they're approximately 8 years old, Thad. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Valencia died 7 months ago, Thad murmured, calculations running through his mind. If they're my children... He couldn't finish the sentence. But Sylvia's ring, Ansel pressed. How would Valencia have obtained it? Thad shook his head, equally mystified. I don't know, but I intend to find out. The modest cottage on the outskirts of Baywick Village looked like something from a fairy tale. Its weathered blue clapboards nearly overtaken by climbing roses, even in autumn. A hand-painted mailbox reading the Reyes sisters confirmed they had found the right place. Thad sat in his Aston Martin across the street, paralyzed by an emotion he rarely experienced: uncertainty. What right did he have to disrupt these children's lives? What could he possibly offer that would compensate for 15 years of absence, even unintentional absence? We can still turn around, Ansel said quietly from the passenger seat. Walk away. Keep things as they are. Thad watched as lights flickered on inside the cottage, silhouettes moving behind lace curtains. The twins, possibly his twins, preparing for dinner perhaps, unaware that their world was about to shift on its axis. No, he said finally. I've missed enough already. The garden path to the front door was lined with ceramic sculptures, abstract forms that nonetheless evoked movement and emotion. Valencia's work, Thad realized with a pang. He recognized her distinctive style, the way she captured fluidity in solid form. Before they could knock, the door swung open, revealing a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a knot. Her posture was defensive, her expression guarded but not surprised. I've been wondering when you'd show up, Thaddeus Westbrook, she said, her voice carrying a subtle accent. Took you long enough. Thad blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. You're Zora, Valencia's sister. Yes. Her piercing gaze assessed him thoroughly. And you're the man who abandoned my sister while she carried your children. The man who never responded to her letters. the man who became a billionaire while she worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Letters? I never received any letters from Valencia. Zora's expression remained stony. Convenient. Ms. Reyes, Ansel interjected smoothly, there seems to be a significant misunderstanding here. Mr. Westbrook only discovered the existence of the children today. At the cemetery, she confirmed, surprising them both. Yes, I know, that was the point. Thad stared at her. You planned this? A flicker of something. Pain, perhaps, or vindication crossed her severe features. Valencia made me promise on her deathbed that I'd find a way for the twins to know their father. She was, too forgiving for her own good. So the ring, Thad began. Aunt Zora, a small voice interrupted from inside the house. Is someone there? Zora hesitated, then stepped aside. You might as well come in. They should hear whatever you have to say. The interior of the cottage was modest but vibrant. Walls painted in jewel tones, shelves crammed with books and small sculptures, mismatched furniture arranged in conversational groupings. It looked lived in, loved. Everything Thad's pristine mansion was not. The twins sat at a round table covered with homework papers, their expressions cautious but curious. Recognition dawned in their eyes as Thad entered. The flower man, Orion said, his voice barely above a whisper. Children, Zora said, her tone gentler than Thad had yet heard from her. This is Thaddeus Westbrook. He and your mother knew each other before you were born. Lyra's sharp gaze moved between the adults, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Is that why you wanted to know about Mom's ring? Thad struggled to find appropriate words. How did one introduce oneself to children who should have known you their entire lives? Yes, he managed finally. That ring, it's very similar to one I gave someone special a long time ago. It was Mom's most treasured possession, Orion said. She said the stars on it were like a map that would always lead us home. Thad felt his throat constrict. The constellation depicted on the ring was Cygnus, the swan constellation visible the night he first met Sylvia. It had become their personal symbol, incorporated into everything from their wedding invitations to the logo of their charitable foundation. But that didn't explain how Valencia had possessed it. May I? He asked, holding out his hand toward Lyra. The girl hesitated, looking to her aunt for guidance. At Zora's tight nod, she reluctantly slipped the ring from her thumb and passed it to Thad. The familiar weight in his palm confirmed what his eyes already knew. This was undoubtedly Sylvia's ring. He turned it over, finding the engraving he knew would be there. 2 souls, 1 constellation. Where did your mother get this? He asked softly. From the lady in the hospital, Lyra answered, as if this were obvious. The one who came to visit before Mom got really sick. Thad exchanged a bewildered glance with Ansel. What lady? Mrs. Westbrook, Orion supplied. She came to see Mom a lot when she was first in the hospital. They would talk for hours. The floor seemed to shift beneath Thad's feet. Sylvia visited your mother? Zora's arms crossed defensively over her chest. You really didn't know? Know what? Thad demanded, his composure fracturing. Perhaps we should sit down, Ansel suggested, noting the twins' growing discomfort with the adult tension. Once the children had been gently dismissed to their room, though Thad suspected they were listening from the hallway, Zora retrieved a wooden box from a bookshelf and placed it on the coffee table between them. Valencia kept everything, she said simply. Every news clipping about you, every photo she could find. She followed your career, your innovation, your marriage. She opened the box, revealing a meticulously organized collection. Articles about Westbrook Innovation's meteoric rise. Photos of Thad accepting awards, opening new research facilities, and most unsettlingly, pictures of him with Sylvia at charity galas and industry events. When Valencia was diagnosed with the heart condition 2 years ago, she finally told me the full story, Zora continued. How she'd discovered she was pregnant after you left. How she'd written to you multiple times at your Cambridge address, without response. I never received, Thad began, but Zora raised a hand to silence him. Somehow, your wife found out about the twins. Valencia never told me how. One day, about 18 months ago, Sylvia Westbrook simply appeared at the hospital during one of Valencia's treatments. Thad struggled to process this information. Sylvia knew all this time. According to Valencia, they formed an unusual friendship. Sylvia would visit whenever Valencia had treatments. They would talk for hours. Zora's expression softened, fractionally. Your wife was not what Valencia expected. She was extraordinary, Thad said automatically, the familiar grief washing over him anew. Yes, Zora agreed unexpectedly. She was. She spoke often of wanting children, how that hadn't been possible for you both. The pieces began to align in Thad's mind with devastating clarity. Sylvia's increased interest in children's charities in the last 2 years of her life. Her sudden desire to renovate the east wing of their home with no clear purpose. The mysterious appointments that appeared in her calendar without explanation. She had been preparing for children she knew existed while he remained, oblivious. When Valencia's condition worsened, Sylvia visited one last time, Zora continued. She gave Valencia the ring and made her a promise that when the time was right, she would make sure the children knew their father. But then, Sylvia died, Ansel said quietly, before she could tell you. Zora nodded. When Valencia followed a few months later, she made me promise to fulfill Sylvia's vow, to find a way for the twins to know you. The cemetery, Thad realized. You've been sending them to Elmshore every weekend. To Sylvia's grave, yes. I knew you visited on the anniversary. It seemed fitting. A heavy silence filled the cottage, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock and the distant sound of the twins whispering in the hallway. They're remarkable children, Zora said finally. Brilliant, compassionate, resilient. Valencia raised them to be proud of who they are, never to feel like they were missing anything. Her gaze hardened. They don't need your money, Thaddeus. They've managed 8 years without it. I understand, Thad said, though his mind was already racing with everything he wanted to provide for them. The best education, opportunities, security. But they're my children. I want to know them. I want them to know me, if they're willing. That will be their decision, Zora replied firmly. Not mine, not yours. Thad nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in her stance. May I speak with them? After a moment's consideration, Zora called out, Orion, Lyra, you can come out now. The twins appeared almost instantly, confirming Thad's suspicion that they'd been eavesdropping. They stood side by side in the doorway, their identical blue eyes. His eyes, he now realized, watching him with guarded curiosity. Mr. Westbrook has something he'd like to discuss with you, Zora told them. I'll be right here. Thad cleared, his throat, suddenly aware that no business negotiation, no product launch, no investor presentation had ever mattered as much as the words he was about to speak. Orion, Lyra, he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I believe I'm your father. The twins didn't look surprised. Instead, they exchanged one of their silent communications before Lyra spoke. We know who you are, she said matter-of-factly. Mom had your picture by her bed. She said you were brilliant, but that your path led away from us. She never said anything bad about you, Orion added quietly. She said you didn't know about us, but that wasn't your fault. The simple absolution in the boy's statement, so undeserved, so generous, threatened to unravel Thad completely. "I would have been there," he said, the words emerging rough, with emotion. "If I had known, I would have been there for you both, for your mother." Mom said sometimes life takes people in different directions. Lyra replied with the peculiar wisdom of children who have faced loss too early, like rivers splitting around a rock. "She was very wise, your mother," Thad acknowledged, fighting to maintain his composure. "Are you really a billionaire?" Orion asked suddenly, his natural childish curiosity breaking through the gravity of the moment. Despite everything, Thad found himself smiling. "Yes, I suppose I am." "Do you have a swimming pool?" Lyra asked, perking up. "Yes." "A helicopter?" Orion followed eagerly. "Two, actually." Zora cleared her throat pointedly. "Children, Mr. Westbrook isn't here to list his possessions." "No," Thad agreed. "I'm here because I've just discovered I have two amazing children, and I'd very much like the chance to get to know them." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "If that's something you might want too." Another silent exchange passed between the twins before Lyra asked, "Would we still live with Aunt Zora?" "Of course," Thad assured them quickly, sensing Zora's tension. "This is your home, but perhaps we could spend time together. I could visit, or you could visit me sometimes." "Would we have to call you Dad?" Orion asked, his expression serious. Thad felt a pang at the question, but shook his head. "You can call me whatever feels comfortable to you." The twins considered this, then huddled together, whispering furiously. Finally, they turned back to the adults. "We have conditions," Lyra announced with the gravity of a seasoned negotiator. Thad bit back a smile at her seriousness. "I'm listening." "First, Aunt Zora has to approve all visits and activities," Orion began. "Second, you can't buy us expensive things without permission," Lyra continued. "Mom said money doesn't solve real problems." "Third," Orion added, "you have to tell us the truth, always, even if you think it will upset us." "Fourth," Lyra said, "you have to learn about Mom, who she really was, not just who you remember." "And fifth," they concluded, in unison, "you have to promise not to disappear again." The last condition struck Thad the hardest. These children, who had lost both their mother and the woman who would have been their stepmother, feared abandonment above all else. "I accept all your conditions," he said solemnly, "and I promise I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since he'd met them, both twins smiled, small, tentative curves of their lips that nevertheless transformed their serious faces into something luminous. "Does this mean we can see your helicopter?" Orion asked hopefully. 2 months later, Thad stood in the newly renovated East Wing of his Beacon Harbor mansion, supervising as contractors installed custom bookshelves in what would become Orion's room. The adjoining space for Lyra featured a ballet bar and art station positioned to capture the morning light. The children weren't moving in. That had never been the goal. But in the weeks since their first meeting, they had begun spending weekends with him, while Zora enjoyed hard-earned respite. The rooms were designed to give them space of their own, a physical acknowledgement that they belonged in his life. "The shelving for the memorial alcove has arrived," Ansel reported, consulting his ever-present tablet. "The craftsman wants to know if you still want the integrated lighting system." "Yes," Thad confirmed, envisioning the space he'd designed to honor both Valencia and Sylvia, the two women who had shaped his life in profoundly different ways, and the display cases for Valencia's sculptures being installed tomorrow. Her gallery provided the specifications. Thad nodded, satisfaction warming him. He'd spent the past weeks immersed in Valencia's artistic legacy, visiting exhibitions of her work, speaking with gallery owners who had championed her unique vision. Each discovery was a bittersweet gift, connecting him to the woman he'd known briefly but profoundly while underscoring how much he'd missed. His phone chimed with a message from Zora. Twins finished packing, ready whenever you are. These simple domestic updates had become the highlight of his week, replacing the market reports and acquisition notifications that once dominated his attention. "Shall I prepare the car?" Ansel asked, noting Thad's smile. "No need. I'll drive. Myself today." Thad had gradually scaled back his dependency on staff when it came to the twins, preferring to handle the parental responsibilities himself. "But check in with Dr. Mehra about those test results, will you?" The medical testing had been Zora's idea, surprisingly. After witnessing Orion's increasing fatigue during physical activities, she'd consented to comprehensive examinations, revealing that both twins had inherited Valencia's cardiac condition. It was manageable with proper care, but the discovery had added new urgency to Thad's determination to be present in their lives. The drive to Baywick Village had become familiar, a journey Thad now made multiple times each week. As the coastal road curved past rocky shores and fishing villages, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in such a short time. Westbrook Innovation still thrived, but he'd reorganized leadership to reduce his daily involvement. His sprawling social calendar had been pared down to essential engagements. Priorities had shifted with seismic force. Board meetings scheduled around school performances, investor calls conducted from hospital waiting rooms during the twins' checkups. When he arrived at the Blue Cottage, the twins were waiting on the porch steps, weekend bags packed neatly beside them. They waved as he pulled up, their initial wariness now softened into cautious affection. "Did you bring the constellation projector?" Orion called out as Thad approached. "Of course, it's all set up in the observatory room." The conversion of his home office into a space for stargazing had been inspired by discovering Orion's passion for astronomy, a fitting interest given his name. "And my ballet shoes?" Lyra asked, already reaching for her bag. "Right where? You left them last weekend," Thad assured her. "Though you might need new ones soon, you seem to be growing an inch every week." Zora appeared in the doorway, her severe expression mellowed by the positive changes she'd witnessed in her niece and nephew. "They've been counting the hours," she informed Thad. "Apparently your chef's chocolate soufflé has set an impossible standard." Thad laughed. "I'll have him prepare extra for you to try." As the twins loaded their bags into his car, chattering about weekend plans, Zora handed Thad a well-worn leather journal. "Valencia's," she explained quietly. "She kept it during her pregnancy and the twins' early years. I thought, you might want to see what you missed, to understand." Thad accepted the journal with reverence. "Thank you. This means more than I can express." Zora studied him with her penetrating gaze. "You're doing well by them, Thaddeus. Better than I expected." Coming from Zora, this qualified as effusive praise. "I'm trying," he acknowledged. "Every day." Later that evening, with the twins finally asleep after an exuberant dinner and stargazing session, Thad sat in the memorial alcove he'd created. Valencia's sculptures gleamed under soft lighting, their organic forms creating complex shadows. Beside them, photographs of Sylvia captured her radiant smile, her compassionate eyes. He opened Valencia's journal carefully, her familiar flowing handwriting bringing an immediate lump to his throat. Today, they asked about their father for the first time, an entry from when the twins were 4 revealed. "I showed them your picture and told them you were creating amazing things that would change the world." Lyra wanted to know if you would like her drawings. Orion asked if you could see the same stars we can. I said yes, the same stars connect us all, even when we're apart. Tears blurred Thad's vision as he continued reading, absorbing the birthdays, first steps, childhood illnesses, and small triumphs he'd missed. Valencia's words held no bitterness, only a profound love for their children and an acceptance of life's unexpected paths. The final entries chronicled her friendship with Sylvia, the initial shock of meeting, the gradual building of trust, and finally, a deep mutual respect. Sylvia brought a ring today, Valencia had written 3 weeks before her death. She says, "It represents a promise that my children will never be alone, that they will know their father when the time is right. She understands now why I never told him, sees how our choices, though painful, were made with love. We are unlikely sisters, bound by our love for the same man and for 2 children who deserve every chance at happiness." Thad closed the journal, overwhelmed by the generosity of both women. Sylvia, who had found it in her heart to embrace her husband's unknown children. Valencia, who had never poisoned those children against the father who hadn't known they existed. A soft sound drew his attention to the doorway, where Lyra stood in pajamas adorned with ballet slippers, her copper hair tousled from sleep. "I had a dream about Mom," she said, padding over to sit beside him. "She was dancing with the lady from the hospital, with Sylvia." Thad put his arm around her small shoulders. "That sounds like a beautiful dream." It was. Lyra leaned against him, studying the photographs and sculptures that populated the memorial space. "Orion thinks they can see us from the stars. Is that true?" "I'd like to think so," Thad answered honestly, remembering his promise to always tell the truth, though science might suggest otherwise. "I think they arranged for us to find you," Lyra declared with childish certainty. "Mom always said nothing in life is coincidence." From the mouth of his daughter, the statement carried profound weight. Was it coincidence that Sylvia had somehow discovered Valencia and the twins? That both women had died within months of each other? That a ring meant to symbolize one love story had become the bridge to another? "Your mother was very wise," Thad said, hugging Lyra closer. "Both of them were," she corrected, her eyes drifting closed as sleep reclaimed her. Thad sat in the quiet room, holding his daughter, surrounded by memories of the 2 extraordinary women who had shaped his past and future. Through the window, stars glittered against the velvet sky, the same stars that had guided him home to a family he never knew he had, to children who carried within them the best of their mother, and perhaps something of himself as well. Tatus, constellation that had once symbolized his beginning with Sylvia, now marked a new chapter. Unexpected, complex, infinitely precious. Not a replacement for what was lost, but an addition to a life that continued to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. In the distance, waves crashed against the rocky shore of Beacon Harbor, their rhythm as constant as the turning of the earth, as enduring as the love that had transcended absence, misunderstanding, and even death itself, bringing a father home to his children at last. Spring arrived at Beacon Harbor with a flourish of cherry blossoms and salt-tinged breezes. 6 months had passed since Thad's discovery at Elmshore Cemetery. 6 months of weekend visits, school recitals, doctor appointments, and the gradual building of trust between a father and the children he'd never known existed. The twins now moved through his home with growing comfort, their initially tentative presence evolving into something that filled the once empty spaces with life and purpose. Thad stood at the kitchen island, frowning at the recipe displayed on his tablet. He dismissed the weekend chef, determined to prepare the twins' breakfast himself, a simple gesture that nonetheless represented his commitment to being an active parent rather than merely a provider. Unfortunately, his culinary skills hadn't improved as rapidly as his parenting instincts. "You're using too much heat," Lyra observed from her perch on a bar stool, watching with critical interest as smoke rose from the pan. "Mom always said pancakes need patience." "Sage advice," Thad conceded, adjusting the flame. "Did your mother cook often?" "Every day," Orion confirmed, not looking up from the astronomy journal he was reading. "She said restaurants were for celebrations, not daily sustenance. Thad smiled at the formal phrasing, so typical of Orion, who had inherited Valencia's artistic sensibility alongside a vocabulary that sometimes startled adults. Both twins carried echoes of their mother in different ways. Lyra in her expressive movements and emotional intuition, Orion in his quiet observation and creative thinking. Yet increasingly, Thad recognized himself in them too. Lyra's strategic approach to problems, Orion's fascination with how things worked. Perhaps we could establish a cooking rotation, Thad suggested, flipping a misshapen pancake with limited success. You both could teach me some of your mother's recipes. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, a phenomenon Thad had learned to recognize but not interpret. After a moment, Lyra nodded decisively. We have her recipe book at home. Aunt Zora keeps it in the special cabinet. We could bring it next weekend, Orion offered, carefully marking his place in the journal before closing it, if Aunt Zora approves. The qualifier, if Aunt Zora approves, remained a constant in their interactions, honoring the twins' first condition for building a relationship with their father. Thad had developed a grudging respect for Zora's fierce guardianship, recognizing that her protectiveness had provided crucial stability after Valencia's death. I'd like that, Thad said, sliding the latest pancake attempt onto Orion's plate. Perhaps we could... His phone chimed with an urgent notification, the specific tone indicating it came from Westbrook Innovations' executive channel. Thad hesitated, torn between parental responsibilities and the company that employed thousands. You should answer it, Lyra said with surprising understanding. We can finish making breakfast. It'll just take a moment, Thad promised, stepping into the adjoining room. The call was from Dr. Eliza Chen, head of the company's biomedical division, a brilliant neurologist who had joined Westbrook Innovations specifically to work on their cardiac neural interface project. Thad, we've got a breakthrough on the arrhythmia detection protocol, she began without preamble. The algorithm is picking up micropatterns 48 hours before conventional monitors show any abnormality. Thad's attention sharpened immediately. The cardiac neural interface had been a personal project for years, aimed at revolutionizing how cardiac conditions were monitored and treated. Now, with the twins' inherited heart condition, his professional passion had acquired intense personal significance. How reliable is the detection? He asked, instinctively moving to where he could still see the children in the kitchen. 93% accuracy in the latest trials. We're ready for expanded human testing, but the review board is being cautious. They want more animal studies first. Thad watched as Lyra confidently took over pancake duties, her copper braids swinging as she expertly flipped a perfectly golden disc. Orion was setting the table, his methodical movements reminiscent of Valencia's careful precision. Push back, Thad instructed. The existing data supports human trials. I'll review the protocols myself and speak with the board on Monday. After finalizing details, he returned to the kitchen to find a stack of immaculate pancakes waiting. These look remarkable, he noted, genuinely impressed. Lyra has the touch, Orion said, with brotherly matter-of-factness. Mom said cooking is just chemistry with better smells. As they settled around the table, Thad noticed Orion's slightly labored breathing, an increasingly common occurrence that the doctors attributed to his heart condition. The sight sent a chill through Thad, despite the spring warmth filtering through the windows. The twins' inherited cardiac issues remained a constant undercurrent of concern, the shadow that occasionally darkened even their brightest moments together. Is everything okay at work? Lyra asked, always attuned to emotional shifts. Actually, yes. Very promising developments in our cardiac research division. The heart patches? Orion asked, his interest piqued. During a tour of Westbrook Innovations labs, he had been particularly fascinated by the experimental cardiac monitoring technology. Similar but more advanced. A neural interface that could predict cardiac episodes before they occur. Like knowing a thunderstorm is coming before the clouds form, Lyra suggested. Thad smiled at her intuitive analogy. Exactly like that. Would it help people like us? Orion asked quietly, the question hanging in the air with all its unspoken wait. Thad met his son's gaze, reminded again of his commitment to honesty. That's my hope, but it's still experimental. Science takes time to get things right. Mom always said patience is hardest when it matters most, Lyra observed, spreading jam on her pancake with careful attention. The simple wisdom in the statement, another piece of Valencia preserved through her children, struck Thad deeply. He had lived most of his adult life in pursuit of the next innovation, the next breakthrough, rarely pausing to consider the human complexities that technology sought to address. Your mother was right about many things, he acknowledged. After breakfast, they moved to what had become their weekend routine. An hour in the home laboratory Thad had installed primarily for the twins' education, but increasingly for his own joy. Today's experiment involved extracting DNA from strawberries, with Orion documenting each step in his meticulous handwriting, while Lyra handled the practical aspects with surprising dexterity. Watching them work together, complementing each other's strengths with wordless efficiency, Thad felt the now familiar ache of missed years. What else had he not witnessed? First words, first steps, first days of school, milestones irretrievably lost to time and circumstance. Did I do this correctly? Orion asked, interrupting Thad's reflections as he held up a test tube of cloudy liquid. Perfect, Thad confirmed, focusing on the present moment rather than the absent past. Now we need to... The doorbell chimed, an unusual occurrence on their private weekend mornings. Thad glanced at the security feed to see Ansel Finch on the porch, his typically composed expression tense. Continue without me, Thad instructed the twins. I'll just be a moment. Ansel entered with uncharacteristic urgency, a tablet clutched in his hand. You need to see this, he said without greeting, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to the laboratory. The tablet displayed a news article from the Beacon Harbor Chronicle, Westbrook Innovations CEO's secret family revealed. Beneath the sensationalist headline was a grainy photo of Thad, with the twins at the Botanical Gardens the previous weekend. How did they... Thad began, cold fury rising. Someone at the medical center, we think, Ansel replied grimly. The twins' records have your name listed as next of kin, alongside Zora. Thad had insisted on adding his name to their medical documentation, a practical step to ensure he could authorize treatment if necessary. Now that protective measure had exposed them all to unwanted scrutiny. The article speculates but doesn't confirm, Ansel continued. They're reaching out for comment. So far, it's just the Chronicle, but it'll spread quickly. Thad's mind raced through potential responses, each insufficient in different ways. For 15 years, he had skillfully managed his public image, controlling which aspects of his life became visible to shareholders, competitors, and the curious public. But this wasn't just about him. This involved two children who had already endured more than their share of loss and change. Call Zora, he decided. She needs to be prepared and contact our legal team about privacy violations at the medical center. Ansel nodded, already composing messages on his phone. What about a statement? Not yet. I need to talk to the twins first. Thad glanced toward the laboratory, where Orion and Lyra remained absorbed in their experiment, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. They were bound to find out eventually, Ansel said quietly. You're too high profile for this to stay private indefinitely. I know, but I wanted it to be on our terms when they were ready. Dad! Lyra's voice called from the laboratory, the first time she had used the title unprompted. "We've isolated the DNA. Come see." The simple word, Dad, momentarily overshadowed the looming crisis. Thad exchanged a significant look with Ansel, before calling back, "I'll be right there." To Ansel, he added in a lower voice, "Buy us time, whatever it takes." After Ansel departed, Thad returned to the laboratory, determined to preserve the twins' peaceful morning for as long as possible. The conversation ahead would be difficult enough without tainting what might be their last moments of normality for some time. "Look," Orion said eagerly, pointing to the whitish strands floating in the solution. "You can actually see it. The building blocks of life," Thad confirmed, focusing on his son's excitement rather than the anxiety churning in his stomach. "Remarkable, isn't it?" "Could we look at our own DNA next time?" Lyra asked, cleaning equipment with methodical care, "to see what parts came from you and what parts came from Mom." The innocent question landed with painful irony given the circumstances. "That's considerably more complex," Thad explained, "but perhaps we could arrange something at the university laboratory." They continued with their scientific exploration, moving from DNA extraction to examining prepared slides under high-powered microscopes. Throughout, Thad remained hyper-aware of his phone buzzing in his pocket, undoubtedly reporters bored, members and concerned connections responding to the emerging story. When the experiment concluded and the twins moved to the music room for their scheduled practice time, Orion with his violin, Lyra at the piano, Thad stepped into his study to make necessary calls. Zora answered immediately. "I've seen it," she said without preamble. "Reporters are already calling the house." "I'm sorry," Thad said, genuine regret coloring his voice. "This isn't how I wanted things to unfold." "It wasn't your fault." The absence of accusation in her tone surprised him. "Valencia always said the truth has its own timeline. I need to tell the twins today." "Yes," Zora agreed. "Better from you than from schoolmates on Monday." After a pause, she added, "Should I come there?" "If you could," Thad said, relief evident in his voice. "They'll need both of us for this conversation." Noon, while waiting for Zora to make the hour-long drive from Baywick Village, Thad composed a brief statement with his communications team, authorizing release only after he had spoken with the children. He then joined the twins in the music room, sitting quietly as they worked through a duet they had been practicing for weeks. The melody, one of Valencia's favorites according to Orion, filled the sunlit room with bittersweet beauty. Thad watched his children create music together, their concentration absolute, their instinctive understanding of each other's timing a marvel to witness. In moments like these, the miracle of their existence overwhelmed him anew. When Zora arrived, her expression somber but composed, the twins immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere. "Something's wrong," Lyra stated rather than asked, setting down her music with careful precision. "Not wrong," Thad corrected gently. "But there's something important we need to discuss. Let's go to the living room." Seated together on the comfortable sectional sofa that had been selected specifically to accommodate family gatherings, Thad and Zora explained the situation as straightforwardly as possible. The news article, the public interest in their relationship, the likelihood of increased attention at school and around town. "So everyone will know you're our dad now?" Orion asked, processing the information with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Yes," Thad confirmed, "and they'll be curious about you both. People may try to take your pictures or ask questions." "Why do they care?" Lyra's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "It's not their business." "Unfortunately," Zora explained, her arm around her niece's shoulders, "when someone is well known like your father, people become interested in their private life. Like celebrities, Orion nodded, making connections. Della in our class has a mom who's on television. People sometimes wait outside their house to take pictures. Thad winced at the comparison, though it wasn't inaccurate. This attention will likely be intense at first, but it will fade over time as people find new stories to discuss. In the meantime, Zora added, we'll need to be extra careful. You'll stay home from school tomorrow while we sort things out, and we might need to adjust some of our regular activities. The twins absorbed this information with remarkable composure, though Thad noted the way Lyra's fingers twisted anxiously in her lap, a gesture reminiscent of Valencia when she was deep in thought. Can we still come here on weekends? Orion asked, the question revealing his primary concern. Of course, Thad assured him immediately. Nothing will change about our time together. We just might need to be more careful about when and how we travel. Will people say mean things about us? Lyra's question cut to the heart of a worry Thad had hoped to address more delicately. He exchanged a glance with Zora before answering honestly, some might, not because of anything you've done, but because people sometimes judge situations they don't understand. Like when Mom was sick and Mrs. Davenport from next door kept saying we should be in foster care instead of with Aunt Zora, Orion recalled, quietly. The casual reference to yet another difficult period the twins had navigated, one Thad had known nothing about, tightened his chest with renewed guilt. Exactly, Zora confirmed. And what did we say then? That other people's opinions don't change what we know is true, the twins recited together, clearly a mantra they had learned well. Thad felt a surge of gratitude for Zora's steadfast presence in their lives, for the resilience she had helped them develop long before he entered the picture. I have something to show you, he said, reaching for a folder he had prepared months ago, but never found the right moment to share. This might help you understand why people are interested in our story. Inside were newspaper clippings and magazine articles chronicling his rise from struggling entrepreneur to technological innovator, the public narrative of his life that had unfolded parallel to Valencia's quiet raising of their children. The twins examined these artifacts of their father's other existence with solemn interest. You invented the neural bridge, Orion observed, pointing to a cover story from a scientific journal. We learned about that in science class. Mr. Phillips didn't mention it was you. And you built the hospital with the butterfly garden? Lyra added, recognizing the pediatric medical center that had been one of Thad's major philanthropic projects. Jamie's little sister went there for her operation. Thad nodded, watching them piece together this dimension of his identity, the public figure whose existence had been entirely separate from their understanding of him as simply the man who visited on weekends, conducted experiments, and made mediocre pancakes. I wish we'd known sooner, Orion said finally, closing the folder, about you being our dad, not about the famous part. The simple statement held no accusation, yet it struck Thad with the force of a physical blow. 6 months of careful relationship building had created a foundation of trust, but the distance between them remained greater than the physical miles that had separated them for 8 years. I wish that too, Thad admitted. Every day. The conversation continued through the afternoon, practical details interspersed with deeper questions as the twins processed this new development. By evening, when Zora prepared to take them home as planned, a tentative strategy had been established. A brief family statement, temporary homeschooling, and careful security measures until the media frenzy inevitably subsided. We still on? For Tuesday dinner? Lyra asked as they gathered their belongings, her casual tone betraying the importance of the answer. Tuesday dinners had become a midweek tradition, a few hours carved from busy schedules to maintain connection between weekend visits. That she sought confirmation of this routine in the midst of upheaval spoke volumes about what truly mattered to her. "Absolutely," Thad promised, "though we might need to meet at your house instead of the restaurant." "Fine by me," Orion shrugged. "Aunt Zora's lasagna is better anyway." As Thad walked them to Zora's car, implementing the first of many new security procedures by checking the driveway for unwanted observers, Lyra suddenly stopped and turned to him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her perceptiveness once again catching him off guard. "I'm fine," he assured her automatically. "Rule 3, she reminded him seriously. "Always tell the truth, even if you think it will upset us." Thad smiled at having his own condition used against him so effectively. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I'm worried. Not about the publicity or what people will say about me, but about how it might affect you both." Lyra considered this, then nodded. "That's an acceptable worry," she decided. "But remember what Mom always said about worry." "What did she say?" Thad asked, eager as always for these glimpses of Valencia's wisdom. "Worry is just imagination pointed in the wrong direction," Orion supplied. "Mom said it's better to use that energy to solve problems instead." Thad laughed despite himself, recognizing the practical philosophy that had enabled Valencia to raise twins alone while building her artistic career against significant obstacles. "Your mother would be very proud of you both," he said. "As am I." He watched their car disappear down the winding driveway, then turned back to the empty house that no longer felt like home without their presence. In his study, dozens of messages awaited response. Board members seeking reassurance, business partners curious about implications, friends offering support or, in some cases, intrusive questions. Instead of addressing any of these, Thad opened his personal email and began composing a message to Dr. Eliza Chen. "Eliza, I want the cardiac neural interface moved to top priority. Accelerate the human trials timeline. Whatever resources you need, they're yours. Also, I'd like to discuss potential pediatric applications, specifically for inherited arrhythmias with onset in pre-adolescence. This is now personal." Thad Monday morning brought the expected media storm. Thad's brief statement, acknowledging that he had recently discovered he was father to twins from a previous relationship and requesting privacy for the children, only partially stemmed the tide of speculation. By midday, reporters had uncovered Valencia's name, pieced together approximate timelines, and begun constructing narratives that ranged from reasonably accurate to wildly sensationalized. Thad weathered an emergency board meeting with grim determination, addressing concerns about company stability and public perception with the same focus he applied to technical challenges. Yes, this was a significant personal development. No, it would not affect his leadership capabilities or dedication to Westbrook Innovations. Yes, he intended to balance his responsibilities as both CEO and father. Some might say these revelations damage your reputation for careful planning and foresight, remarked Gerald Winters, the most traditional board member. If you didn't know about your own children for 8 years, what else might you have overlooked? The implied criticism hung in the air, echoing sentiments expressed in several financial blogs that morning. Thad leaned forward, his expression neutral, but his voice carrying the quiet intensity that had made him a formidable presence in boardrooms for over a decade. "On the contrary," he replied evenly, "this situation demonstrates exactly why our company's adaptive response protocols are industry-leading. When presented with new information, even life-altering personal information, I have integrated it efficiently, created appropriate structures, and continued operations with minimal disruption. I'd suggest that's precisely the kind of adaptability shareholders should value." The response effectively silenced Winters and shifted the conversation to practical considerations rather than moralistic judgment. By meeting's end, the board had affirmed its confidence in Thad's leadership and approved a statement supporting his request for privacy regarding the children. Upon returning to his office, Thad found Ansel waiting with a tablet displaying security footage from the twins' school. 2 news vans and a freelance photographer, Ansel reported grimly. Zora already collected the children through the back entrance, but this is untenable. Thad reviewed the footage, noting the reporters positioned strategically around the small private academy where Orion and Lyra had thrived since kindergarten. The sight ignited a protective fury he hadn't known himself capable of until recently. Options? He demanded, already mentally cataloging possibilities. Short-term, homeschooling as discussed. Mid-term, transfer to Westlake Academy. They have experience with high-profile families and extensive security protocols. Long-term, private tutors or relocation to a less media-saturated area. The final suggestion gave Thad pause. Relocation? You mean moving them from Baywick Village? It's worth considering, Ansel acknowledged cautiously. The cottage is charming, but difficult to secure, and Baywick is small enough that anonymity is impossible. The practical merits of the suggestion were undeniable, yet Thad hesitated. The blue cottage represented far more than a physical dwelling. It was the only home the twins had ever known, filled with Valencia's presence and the security of familiar routines. Moving them would mean another profound disruption in lives, already marked by significant loss. Let's table that for now, he decided. Focus on immediate security enhancements for the cottage and temporary educational arrangements. As he navigated the remainder of his professional obligations that day, Thad found himself increasingly distracted by thoughts of the twins, how they were coping with this abrupt end to their relative anonymity, whether their classmates had seen the news coverage, if Zora was managing the additional stress adequately. By late afternoon, he had rearranged his schedule to leave the office early, stopping first at an educational supply store to purchase materials Zora had requested for temporary homeschooling. The unfamiliar environment, shelves stocked with workbooks, science kits, and art supplies, momentarily overwhelmed him. What seemed an uncomplicated errand became another reminder of how much he had missed, how much he still had to learn about his children's needs and interests. A store employee eventually helped him locate the specific items on Zora's meticulously detailed list, plus several additions he thought might engage the twins during their enforced time away from school. The drive to Baywick Village took longer than usual, due to a careful route designed to identify and evade any following vehicles. When he finally arrived at the cottage, the sight of unfamiliar security personnel positioned discreetly around the property confirmed that Ansel had implemented the enhanced protection protocols they'd discussed. Inside, the familiar chaos of the twins' afternoon routine continued, despite the extraordinary circumstances. Orion sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by math worksheets, while Lyra practiced ballet positions, using the back of a chair as a makeshift barre. Zora moved between them, offering guidance and encouragement with remarkable composure given the situation. "You're early," she observed as Thad entered, though her tone suggested approval rather than criticism. "I thought I might be helpful with the evening routine," he explained, setting down the educational supplies, "and I wanted to see how they're managing." "Better than most adults would," Zora acknowledged, lowering her voice so the children wouldn't hear. Though Orion had trouble sleeping last night, and Lyra's been checking the windows every half hour. The information tightened Thad's chest. Despite their outward resilience, the twins were clearly processing the disruption in their own ways. "Dad!" Lyra noticed his presence and abandoned her ballet practice to approach. "Did you see the news vans? They were outside school today. Mr. Peterson from the office told them to leave, but they just moved across the street." Her matter-of-fact tone belied the strangeness of the situation, her first experience with public scrutiny simply because of who her father was. "I heard about that," Thad confirmed, matching her pragmatic approach. "That's why we decided you'll study at home for a little while. Like when Mum was really sick," Orion noted, joining the conversation. "We did school here for 3 months then." Another piece of their history Thad hadn't known, another challenge they had faced without him. Yes, something like that, but hopefully not for as long. As the evening progressed, they established a new normal with surprising ease. Homework review, dinner preparation, using some of Valencia's recipes that had become familiar to Thad over recent months, and the bedtime routine that now included Thad reading aloud from the astronomy encyclopedia that was Orion's current obsession. "Will you still come to my science presentation?" Orion asked as Thad prepared to leave. The event scheduled for the following month suddenly uncertain, given the circumstances. "Absolutely," Thad promised without hesitation. "We might need to make some adjustments, but I wouldn't miss it." "And my ballet showcase?" Lyra pressed, her expression serious. "That too. Nothing about our plans together will change, just some of the logistics around them." Satisfied with this assurance, the twins completed their goodnight rituals. Orion's methodical arrangement of books for the next day's reading, Lyra's precise positioning of ballet slippers for morning practice. Watching these intimate routines that had developed long before he entered their lives, Thad was struck anew by how much they had grown and thrived without him, guided by Valencia's loving wisdom and Zora's steady presence. As he descended the cottage stairs after tucking them in, he found Zora waiting in the kitchen, 2 mugs of tea steaming on the table. "You handled that well," she observed, gesturing for him to join her. "They were worried you might retreat into your corporate world when things got complicated." The assessment stung with its accuracy. Before the twins, Thad had indeed approached personal challenges by immersing himself more deeply in work, treating emotional complexity as a distraction to be minimized rather than a reality to be embraced. "I'm learning," he acknowledged, accepting the tea, Valencia's favorite blend he recognized from weekend mornings at the cottage. "There's something we need to discuss," Zora said after a moment, her expression unreadable. "Something I've been considering since before this media situation developed." Thad tensed, preparing for criticism, or perhaps new restrictions on his involvement with the twins. Instead, Zora slid a folder across the table, similar to the many documents they had, exchanged regarding the children's education, medical care, and legal status. "Formal shared custody," she explained as he opened it to find preliminary legal paperwork. "I've been consulting with an attorney about the options." Thad stared at the documents, momentarily speechless. Since discovering the twins, he had been careful not to overstep, to respect Zora's legal guardianship established after Valencia's death. The possibility of formal parental rights had remained an unspoken question for future consideration. "Valencia always intended for you to know them eventually," Zora continued when he didn't immediately respond. "She believed you would be a good father if given the chance. Recent events have proven her right." "Are you certain?" Thad asked, studying her expression for any sign of reservation. "This would mean significant changes to the current arrangement." "The current arrangement was always temporary," Zora replied with characteristic directness. "The twins need stability, consistency, and legal clarity, especially now with this public attention. They need to know exactly where they belong and who's responsible for them." Thad nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in her perspective. "And you, where would you fit in this new arrangement?" A flicker of vulnerability crossed Zora's typically stoic features. "I'm not going anywhere. The twins need me. And frankly, you do too. But legally, they should have their father's name and protection. The gesture, coming from a woman who had initially viewed him with justifiable suspicion and who had every reason to maintain distance, moved Thad deeply. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing no elaborate expression could adequately convey his gratitude. Zora nodded once, acknowledgement rather than acceptance. "Review the documents with your attorney. We can discuss specific terms once the current situation stabilizes." As Thad prepared to leave, navigating the new security measures that had transformed the once open cottage into a protected compound, he paused at the small memorial alcove Zora had created near the entry. Valencia's photograph smiled from an antique frame, surrounded by smaller images of the twins at various ages, visual documentation of the years he had missed. A new addition caught his eye, a recent photograph of Thad with the twins at the botanical gardens. The same image the newspaper had published, but here displayed intentionally among family memories, an acknowledgement of his place in their lives. The sight strengthened his resolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead, media scrutiny, legal complexities, the ongoing health concerns that sometimes kept him awake at night, he would face them with the same determination that had built his business empire. Not for professional accolades or financial success this time, but for something infinitely more valuable, the opportunity to be the father his children deserved. As he drove back to Beacon Harbor through the spring evening, the stars emerging above matched those on Sylvia's ring, the constellation that had led him through the most unexpected of circumstances to discover the family he never knew he had. Autumn painted Beacon Harbor in fiery hues, the coastal winds carrying the first hints of winter's approach. 1 year had passed since that fateful day at Elmshore Cemetery, a year of transformation, challenges, and the gradual forging of family. Bonds that even Thad, with all his strategic foresight, could never have anticipated. The formal custody arrangement, finalized after months of careful legal navigation, had established a structure that honored both Valencia's legacy and the twins' growing relationship with their father. They now divided their time between the Blue Cottage in Baywick Village and Thad's reimagined home on Crestfallen Point, dual anchors in lives still finding balance after profound change. "Dad, can you help with this equation?" Orion called, from the study area of what had once been Thad's formal dining room, but now served as a multi-purpose learning space. The casual use of "Dad," once rare and hesitant, had become natural over time, each utterance still bringing a quiet satisfaction that outweighed any professional achievement. Thad joined his son at the large table covered with textbooks and graph paper. At 9 years old, Orion was already tackling mathematics far beyond his grade level, his analytical mind constantly seeking greater challenges. "I'm trying to understand why this approach works," Orion explained, pointing to a complex algebraic equation, "not just how to solve it." "The why is always more important than the how," Thad agreed, settling beside him to work through the problem step by step. Through the adjacent doorway, he could see Lyra in the living room, working with her new dance instructor, another adjustment to their evolving circumstances. When media attention had made attending regular ballet classes untenable, Thad had arranged for private lessons with a former principal dancer from the National Ballet. Today, they were working on a variation from Swan Lake, Lyra's copper braid swinging as she executed a series of precise turns. These moments of ordinary family life, homework help, ballet practice, dinner preparations, had acquired extraordinary significance in Thad's once work-centered existence. The corporate titan who had built a tech empire now measured success differently, by Orion's growing confidence, by Lyra's joyful expressions, by their collective resilience in facing challenges together. The most significant of those challenges waited on Thad's tablet, minimized but ever present in his thoughts. Dr. Eliza Chen's latest report on the cardiac neural interface included preliminary results from pediatric testing, data that could potentially transform the twins' medical prognosis. He had purposely waited until after their study session to review it, unwilling to let his reaction, whether positive or negative, disrupt their afternoon routine. "I think I understand now," Orion said, completing the final calculation with careful precision. "It's about finding patterns within apparent complexity." "Most problems are, if we look closely enough," Thad responded, the statement resonating beyond mathematics. As Orion moved on to history assignments, Thad retreated to his home office, redesigned with glass walls that allowed him to maintain visual connection with the children while working. He opened Dr. Chen's report, scanning the executive summary. With the focused attention that had built his reputation in the technology sector, the results exceeded even his cautious optimism. In pediatric trials, the cardiac neural interface had demonstrated 97% accuracy in predicting arrhythmic episodes, 72 hours before conventional monitors detected any abnormality. Early intervention protocols had prevented 89% of potential cardiac events in the trial population. The implications for children with inherited conditions like the twins were profound, potentially transforming a life-threatening diagnosis into a manageable chronic condition. Thad leaned back in his chair, emotions conflicting within him. Professional satisfaction at a breakthrough that would benefit countless patients worldwide. Personal relief at the possibilities for Orion and Lyra, and beneath it all, a persistent ache that Valencia hadn't lived to see this development, that she had faced the terror of her diagnosis and its implications for her children without the hope this technology could provide. His phone chimed with a message from Zora, twins cardiologist called. "Wants to discuss new monitoring options at next appointment. Is this related to your project?" Their co-parenting relationship had evolved into an effective partnership. Over the past year, Zora's initial wariness giving way to grudging respect and eventually genuine collaboration. She remained the keeper of Valencia's memory, the connection to the twins' early years, while Thad provided new opportunities and a different kind of stability. "Yes," he replied, "promising developments. I'll call you this evening with details." A timer alert reminded him of the afternoon medication schedule, another routine that structured their days. The twins' cardiac condition required careful management, a regimen of medications and monitoring that had become second nature to all of them. "Medicine time," he called, retrieving the carefully organized pillboxes from the kitchen cabinet. The twins appeared with practiced promptness, Orion marking items off his daily checklist, while Lyra verified the correct dosages, roles they had established themselves, each applying their natural tendencies to the necessary task. "Dr. Abrams called Aunt Zora," Lyra mentioned casually as she swallowed her pills with apple juice. "Is there news about the heart study?" Thad had maintained transparency about the research, careful not to create false hope while ensuring the twins understood the potential benefits of the technology he was developing. "There's positive progress," he confirmed. "We'll discuss it tonight when Aunt Zora joins us for dinner." Lyra nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, though Thad noticed Orion's thoughtful expression. His son rarely accepted information without deeper examination. "Is it the neural interface?" Orion asked predictably. "The one from your labs?" "Yes, and the preliminary results are encouraging. But as we've discussed, medical advances require extensive testing before becoming widely available. Even when the developer's children need them," Orion noted, with the directness that sometimes startled adults unused to his perceptiveness. "Especially then," Thad acknowledged. "Proper protocols matter most when personal feelings are involved." This principle, maintaining ethical standards despite emotional investment, had guided Thad through the challenging dual role of parent and innovator. Though he had prioritized the cardiac research, he had scrupulously avoided applying improper influence over regulatory processes, understanding that scientific integrity ultimately served his children's best interests. As dinner preparations began, a cooperative effort that had become their weekday ritual, Thad observed the subtle ways the twins had changed over the past year. Beyond the expected physical growth, they had developed new confidence, new interests, new expressions of their unique personalities. Orion, initially the more reserved of the pair, had found his voice through science and mathematics, his natural analytical abilities flourishing with proper nurturing. Lyra had channeled her emotional sensitivity into both dance and writing, recently beginning a journal similar to the one Valencia had kept throughout her life. Both children had weathered the public attention with remarkable resilience, neither shrinking from scrutiny nor being defined by it. The initial media frenzy had eventually subsided, as Thad had predicted, though their story occasionally resurfaced in business profiles or features about non-traditional families. "The Memorial Garden Committee approved our design," Lyra announced, as she chopped vegetables with practiced skill. "Miss Peterson said construction will begin next month." The Memorial Garden had been the twins' idea, a public space at Baywick Village Library dedicated to Valencia's memory, featuring sculptures from her collection alongside plants mentioned in her poetry. What had begun as a family healing project had expanded into a community initiative, with local artists contributing and children from Valencia's former arts program participating in its creation. "That's wonderful news," Thad replied, recognizing the milestone this represented in their grief journey. "Your mother would be honored." Aunt Zora cried when they showed her the final plans, Orion added matter-of-factly, but she said they were happy tears. The distinction, happy tears versus sad ones, had featured prominently in their ongoing conversations about grief and healing. The twins had taught Thad that sorrow and joy could coexist, that honoring the past didn't preclude embracing the future, lessons he had needed perhaps more than they did. The doorbell announced Zora's arrival, her weekday visits now a comfortable routine rather than the carefully negotiated interactions of early days. She entered with her characteristic purposeful stride, carrying a worn recipe book that Thad recognized as Valencia's collection. "I found it," she announced without preamble. "The blackberry cobbler recipe you've been attempting to recreate. Valencia modified it from our grandmother's version. Less sugar, more lemon zest." The quest to perfect Valencia's signature dessert had become something of a running challenge between Thad and Zora, each attempt bringing them incrementally closer to the remembered flavor that the twins described, but neither adult could quite achieve. "Excellent, we'll test it this weekend," Thad replied, accepting the book with appropriate reverence, these tangible connections to Valencia remaining precious to all of them. Dinner conversation moved naturally between everyday topics and weightier matters. School projects, the upcoming holiday schedule, and eventually the promising developments in cardiac research. Thad explained the technology in terms the twins could comprehend, careful to balance optimism with realistic expectations about timelines and approvals. "So it's like an early warning system," Orion summarized, his analytical mind immediately grasping the core concept. "Exactly. Instead of responding to a problem that's already happening, it predicts the problem before it starts. Like Mom, always." "Checking our coat buttons before winter," Lyra observed, drawing one of the simple connections that frequently illuminated her thought process. Fixing them before they could fall off. The comparison, finding profound meaning in ordinary experiences, was so characteristic of Valencia that a moment of silence fell over the table, each person transported briefly to memories of her practicality and foresight. "Your mother would have explained it much better than I did," Thad acknowledged, these moments of honoring her presence rather than avoiding her absence having become integral to their family dynamic. After dinner, while the twins completed their evening routines, Thad and Zora retreated to the study to discuss logistics for the upcoming medical appointments that would determine the twins' eligibility for the experimental monitoring program. The University Ethics Committee has questions, Thad explained, reviewing the latest correspondence. Legitimate concerns about conflict of interest given my connection to both the technology and potential participants. Can those concerns be addressed? Zora asked, her protective instincts evident despite her measured tone. Yes, through proper disclosures and independent oversight. Dr. Chen is implementing additional safeguards to ensure completely objective evaluation. Thad paused, considering his next words carefully. There's another matter we should discuss, the genetic testing results. The comprehensive genetic analysis had been conducted months earlier as part of the twins' overall cardiac evaluation, providing detailed insights into their inherited condition. What had emerged, however, was additional information beyond the expected cardiac markers, genetic indicators with potential implications for their future health and development. The expanded screening identified markers for artistic aptitude, Thad continued, showing Zora the relevant section of the report, particularly in spatial reasoning and pattern recognition, traits that would explain Lyra's natural grace and Orion's mathematical abilities. Valencia always said talent was more than genetics, Zora noted. Though she studied the report with interest, she believed in nurturing natural affinities rather than directing them. I agree completely, Thad assured her, having undergone his own evolution in thinking about predetermined paths versus organic development. This isn't about shaping them, but understanding them, knowing what inherent strengths might need support as they grow. Their collaborative approach to parenting decisions had become one of the unexpected gifts of this complicated situation. Zora's intuitive understanding of the twins balancing Thad's analytical perspective, their combined insights creating a more comprehensive support system than either could have provided alone. As they concluded their discussion, Lyra appeared in the doorway in pajamas, adorned with ballet slippers, her damp hair freshly braided for sleep. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "I was wondering if we could visit Mom's grave this weekend. It's been a while." The request, simple yet laden with emotional significance, reflected the ongoing process of integrating past and present, of maintaining connections while forming new ones. "Of course," Thad responded immediately. "Saturday morning?" Lyra nodded, seemingly relieved by his ready agreement. "Orion wants to bring some of the new star lilies from the garden, the white ones that just bloomed." "An excellent choice. Your mother always appreciated thoughtful details." After Lyra returned to her evening reading, Zora gathered her belongings to depart, pausing at the collection of family photographs that now lined the hallway, a visual timeline that acknowledged all parts of the twins' history. "She would be pleased," Zora said quietly, her gaze lingering on a recent image of the twins at their school science fair. "Not just with how they're thriving, but with how you've honored her place in their lives." The assessment, coming from the person who had known Valencia best, who had initially approached Thad with justified suspicion, carried profound meaning. "I hope so," he replied simply. "I'm still learning." "We all are," Zora acknowledged with uncharacteristic gentleness. "That's what Valencia would say, isn't it? That life's greatest lessons never end." Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, autumn sunlight filtering through lingering fog as Thad drove the twins to Elmshore Cemetery. The route had become familiar over the past year, their visits to Valencia's grave evolving from somber obligations to meaningful rituals of remembrance. "I finished Mom's favorite book, Orion mentioned from the back seat, a well-worn copy of The Little Prince on his lap. I understand why she read it to us so many times now. Because it's about seeing with your heart instead of just your eyes, Lyra added, expertly weaving white star lilies into a simple wreath. And about taking care of what matters to you. Thad listened to their conversation with quiet appreciation. These glimpses into Valencia's parenting philosophy, helping him understand not just who his children were, but how they had become themselves under her guidance. At the cemetery, they followed the now familiar path to Valencia's grave, a simple marker beneath a maple tree that blazed with autumn color. The twins moved with practiced coordination, Orion carefully removing faded flowers from their previous visit, while Lyra positioned a fresh wreath against the stone. Thad stood slightly apart, giving them this moment of connection with their mother, observing the gentle care they brought to the ritual. After a few minutes of quiet reflection, Orion unexpectedly turned toward him. "We should visit Mrs. Westbrook's grave too," he suggested with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Since we're here." The proposal momentarily startled Thad. Though they had discussed Sylvia and her connection to their story, the twins had never before expressed interest in visiting her grave, the place where their paths had first crossed without understanding. "Are you sure?" he asked, studying their expressions for any sign of discomfort. "She was important," Lyra stated simply. "Mom said she was brave and kind, and if she hadn't given Mom the ring that day at the cemetery, we might never have found you." The straightforward assessment, typical of children's ability to distill complex emotional situations to their essence, brought a familiar tightness to Thad's throat. "If you'd like to visit her," he agreed, "I think that would be appropriate." They walked together through the winding cemetery paths, passing beneath ancient oaks that had witnessed generations of grief and remembrance. As they approached Sylvia's grave, the marble headstone now weathered by seasons of sun and rain, Thad felt an unexpected sense of completion, of circles closing. The twins stood respectfully before the marker, reading the inscription with solemn interest. After a moment, Lyra removed several star lilies from her basket and placed them carefully against the stone. "Thank you for helping our mom," she said, softly, addressing the marker directly, "and for making sure we'd find our dad when the time was right." The simple expression of gratitude, offered without prompting, embodied the generosity of spirit Valencia had cultivated in her children, their capacity to recognize connection and kindness across the complicated circumstances of their origins. As they stood together in the dappled autumn light, Thad was struck by the extraordinary convergence of lives and choices that had brought them to this moment. Valencia's decision to raise the twins alone, protecting both their future and his career path, Sylvia's unexpected discovery and compassionate response, Zora's faithful guardianship after Valencia's death, and even his own grief-driven visit to this same cemetery 1 year ago. The seemingly random timing that had allowed three paths to finally intersect. "Dad," Orion said suddenly, breaking the reflective silence. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Thad asked, recognizing his son's expression of deep consideration. "Mom believed everything happens for a reason, even difficult things," Orion began, choosing his words with characteristic care. "Do you think that's true? That there was a reason for all of this?" The profound question, exploring purpose within, pain, meaning within missed connections, deserved honest engagement rather than easy platitudes. "I believe," Thad answered slowly, "that meaning often comes not from what happens to us, but from how we respond to it. Your mother chose to see purpose in challenges, to find growth in difficulty. That perspective shaped how she lived and how she raised you both." Orion nodded, absorbing this response with his typical thoughtfulness. "So even though you didn't know about us for a long time, And even though Mom and Mrs. Westbrook are gone, we can still create something meaningful from all of it. We already have, Lyra interjected with unexpected certainty. Look at us now. We're a family. Different from other families, maybe, but still a family. Her simple declaration, offered without qualification or doubt, crystallized what they had been building together over the past year, not a replacement for what was lost, but something new that honored all that had come before. As they walked back toward the car, Thad recalled the constellation ring that had first connected them, the pattern of stars that had illuminated Sylvia's relationship with him and later served as Valencia's symbolic guide for the twins. Different meanings layered upon the same object, just as their intertwined lives had created patterns none of them could have foreseen alone. "Can we stop by the cottage before going home?" Lyra asked as they reached the cemetery gates. "I want to show Aunt Zora my history project before Monday." "Of course," Thad agreed, this fluid movement between their two homes having become natural over time. "We can have lunch there if she's available." The drive to Baywick Village passed with comfortable conversation, the twins discussing school, projects and weekend plans with the easy confidence of children who knew they were securely anchored despite life's uncertainties. As they approached the familiar blue cottage, now protected by discreet security features but still maintaining its charming character, Thad noticed an unusual vehicle in the driveway beside Zora's modest sedan. "Is that Dr. Chen's car?" Orion asked, recognizing the distinctive electric vehicle from their visits to Westbrook Innovations' Medical Research Division. "It appears to be," Thad confirmed, a mixture of curiosity and concern rising within him. Dr. Chen rarely made personal visits, particularly unannounced ones on weekends. Inside, they found Zora and Dr. Chen seated at the kitchen table, files spread between them, both women wearing expressions that suggested significant news. They looked up simultaneously as the family entered, and Thad immediately recognized the barely contained excitement in Dr. Chen's typically professional demeanor. "The FDA approval came through this morning," she announced without preamble. "Expedited pathway for pediatric applications of the neural interface, specifically for inherited arrhythmias. We can begin implementation immediately for qualified patients." The implications washed over Thad in waves: scientific validation of years of research, regulatory recognition of the technology's potential, and most significantly, accelerated access for children like Orion and Lyra to a system that could transform their prognosis. "That's excellent news," he managed, professional satisfaction momentarily overshadowed by personal relief. "There's more," Zora added, her typical reserve softened by evident emotion. "Dr. Chen brought the twins' latest test results. The genetic markers we've been monitoring have stabilized," Dr. Chen finished, turning to address the twins directly. "Which means your condition isn't progressing as rapidly as we initially feared. With the neural interface providing early warning of potential episodes and your current medication regimen, we have every reason to expect you'll lead normal, active lives with minimal restrictions." Orion absorbed this information with characteristic thoughtfulness, while Lyra immediately turned to Thad, her face illuminated with understanding. "This is what you've been working on all this time, isn't it? Since before you even knew us." The question, connecting past to present with uncanny insight, caught Thad by surprise. "The research began years ago," he acknowledged, "though its significance became much more personal once I found you both. In truth, the cardiac neural interface had initially been conceived as a memorial to his own father, whose sudden cardiac death had occurred when Thad was only slightly older than the twins were now. That personal motivation had driven the VUM project forward, even when investors questioned its commercial viability. sustaining his commitment through years of research challenges and regulatory hurdles. Now, in one of life's profound ironies, that long-ago loss had created the path to protecting his own children, a connection across generations that neither science nor logic could have predicted, but that seemed in this moment to possess its own perfect symmetry. As the adults discussed implementation details and next steps, Thad watched the twins process this news in their distinct ways. Orion asking specific technical questions that reflected his deepening interest in medicine, Lyra sketching what appeared to be a celebratory dance sequence in her ever-present notebook. "We should mark this occasion," he suggested when the medical discussion concluded. "Perhaps dinner at Harborview with dessert from Marinelli's." The proposal, referencing the twins' favorite restaurant and ice cream parlor, Treats Reserved, for special celebrations, was met with immediate enthusiasm. As they prepared to depart, Lyra paused before a photograph of Valencia that held prominent place in the cottage's living room. "Mom would be happy about this news," she said confidently. "She always said science was just another way of creating miracles." The statement, capturing Valencia's integration of practical reality with poetic perspective, perfectly expressed the spirit that continued to guide them all, even in her absence. Later that evening, after a celebratory dinner and the twins' delighted exploration of Marinelli's extensive dessert menu, they gathered on the cottage's small porch beneath a sky emblazoned with stars. Orion had brought his telescope, determined to locate the Cygnus constellation despite the season's shifting celestial patterns. "Found it!" he announced triumphantly, adjusting the focus before inviting his sister to look. "It really does look like the pattern on the ring," Lyra confirmed, examining the formation with interest before offering Thad a turn at the eyepiece. As he observed the distant stars, the same configuration that had adorned Sylvia's ring, that had eventually led him to these remarkable children, Thad felt a profound sense of connection, transcending time and circumstance, science and serendipity, choice and chance, loss and discovery, all intertwined to create the story they were living together. "Your mother once told me something I never fully understood until now," he said, still gazing at the stars that had witnessed humanity's joys and sorrows for millennia. "She said that the universe arranges itself perfectly, even when we can't see the pattern." "Mom believed that too," Orion noted, making small adjustments to his telescope. She said looking for patterns was her favorite part of being an artist. "And of being our mom," Lyra added softly. "She was always finding connections between things, including," Thad reflected silently, "the unexpected connection between a grieving widower and the children he never knew he had. A reunion orchestrated, through time and circumstance, through the compassionate actions of two remarkable women who had, in their different ways, shaped the family that now existed beneath the autumn stars." As the evening deepened into night, the conversation flowed easily between practical plans and philosophical musings, scientific possibilities and artistic endeavors, the balanced perspective that had emerged from their blended family's diverse strengths. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, medical implementations, school adjustments, the ongoing navigation of public interest in their unusual story. But tonight, beneath the constellation that had guided them together, they simply existed as a family, different from what any of them might have imagined, yet perfect in its own unexpected way. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.